Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Monday English live broadcast. I welcome all of our listeners on Substack, on YouTube, Instagram. Where else are we, Yoel?
We are on X, Facebook also.
Wow, we are so powerful. We broadcast everywhere. All right, so everybody who is everywhere, thank you for joining our English language broadcast. In reality, I think it's maybe probably like 10 people because our English broadcasts are very recent. But these are these are 10 very appreciated people, and we are very glad to have you. And hopefully you will share this with many people so that many more can learn about this, and you'll subscribe and like and hit the bell and all those things. All right, so today, what do we got, Yoel, for today? Today, what is the topic?
The main topic of today is who is George Soros and what is he doing?
Who is George Soros and what is he doing? And the reason that's the topic for today is that we have prepared an investigation on George Soros. And we just a few minutes ago published it on our Substack. I'm going to show you where it is. So it's on the front page of our Substack, right there. If you can see my screen now. So if you go to our Substack, that's the new article, the new front page article. If you go inside, this is what it looks like. Okay, and here's the summary of what we're doing. So George Soros is an elderly man. He's 95 years old, and he's a whale-sized speculator, billionaire, investor, and philanthropist, if you didn't know who he was. He made a fortune in financial markets, most famously by betting against the British pound in 1992. He's been accused in many places of, quote unquote, breaking the British pound or breaking the Bank of England with his speculative investments. People who defend him say, well, look, he didn't break the Bank of England. I mean, it was going to get broken because the exchange rate that they were using was unsustainable. The market forces were gonna take those mechanisms down. It couldn't be sustained. So if it wasn't Soros, somebody was going to bet against the British pound. So in that sense, you can say, well, he was blameless for that because it was going to happen. So he made a lot of money, but somebody was going to make a lot of money betting against the British pound. The problem was the structure, not what he did specifically. But anyway, people have accused him of breaking the Bank of England, breaking the British pound. What I think is more reasonable as a criticism is that through his Open Society Foundations, which is work that he glosses as philanthropy, he has showered rivers of money on the political causes that he cares about. And what does he care about? Well, he's been amplifying and accelerating the Western civilization's institutional shift toward the woke agenda. Okay, so Soros has been strategically backing movements, policies, actors that reframe justice, identity, and truth itself. He stands accused of spending his money in order to weaken law and order and the system of justice, open borders to uncontrolled immigration, implement policies to fight climate change, quote unquote, make the trans agenda and the broader LGBTQI plus activism official and mainstream, weaken local democracy in favor of global governance, push progressive identity politics, and support groups and movements that demonize Israel and apologize for jihadism. He's actually on record advocating for Hamas, believe it or not. So this is an article, opinion article that he wrote for the Financial Times called "America and Israel Must Open the Door to Hamas." Okay, the jihadi terrorists. So these are the things that I think are reasonable criticisms of Soros. I think it is not an exaggeration to say that Soros is working hard to destroy the West. Okay?
Wow.
Tells people that he is a Jew. And whenever somebody accuses that George Soros is a malicious destroyer of the West, as I am doing, then immediately a gaggle of defenders rises to complain, oh, look, that's improper English. Let's fix that, or else I'm going to forget. So a gaggle of defenders rises to complain that this is supposedly anti-Semitic. Because, of course, there's the traditional anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that says that there's a cabal of super powerful Jews who, in secret, are taking over Western institutions clandestinely, and they're going to use that clandestine power because they're, mean, is the theory, to destroy the rest of us, to destroy Western civilization. Okay, this is the anti-Semitic propaganda of the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which is it's a document that was created by the Tsarist secret police. It's a fraud. It's complete. Everything it says is completely untrue, and it was documented. Moreover, in 1921, it was documented that that the Protocols of Zion was a fraud, and we have an article on that. It's called The Prague Cemetery, where we explain that what the Russian secret police did is it took a different book, which was a dialogue in hell between Machiavelli and Montesquieu. Right? We explained that here. Dialogue in Hell between Machiavelli and Montesquieu, which was the book from Maurice Joly, a political thinker from the late 19th century that had nothing to do with Jews. He was talking about how the bureaucrats might take over a democracy in secret. And he said, this is definitely going to happen if people allow the bureaucrats to spend the money of the citizens in secret. In other words, if you allow the bureaucrats to have a clandestine service, something like the CIA, something like the FSB, or the German BND, or the British MI5 and MI6. If you allow these kinds of things to exist, and the bureaucrats can spend the money of the citizens in secret, well, that's a lot of money, and it will allow them to corrupt the institutions of democracy clandestinely, and then they take over democracy. They turn democracy into a simulacrum, into a managed reality, as we like to say. Joly was explaining that, but it had nothing to do with Jews. He was talking about Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. And at the end of this article, we have the link to the Joly article, or we have it somewhere. Let me see. Yeah, it's Joly. Here we go. That's it. This is the article on Joly. And this is where we explain what Joly was doing, what he wrote. The content of his attack was aimed at Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, not against the Jews. The guy who was using the secret police to corrupt all of French democracy, that was Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. And that's who Maurice Joly was implicitly criticizing in his book. But the character that explains how democracy can be clandestinely corrupted, that's Machiavelli, the great Italian Cinquecento political theorist. And he appears as a character in Joly's novel, and Machiavelli explains all this. He explains how these Machiavellian clandestine policies can be implemented. And so what the Russian police did is, by the early 20th century, nobody knew about Joly's book anymore because Louis Napoleon had arrested Joly. had thrown him in prison, and then he had confiscated all copies of the book so that nobody could criticize him, because Louis Napoleon was doing what Joly said he was doing. So nobody knew that Joly's book existed anymore. And what the Russian police did is that they took the discourses of Machiavelli in Joly's book, and with those discourses, they modified them a little bit so that it would seem like these were the minutes of a secret meeting of super powerful Jews that were clandestinely corrupting everything to destroy Western civilization. Now, the accusations in the protocols were demonstrated to be false by the protocols. In other words, the protocols of the elders of Zion produced its own refutation, because that document became the central propaganda strategy of the German Nazis. Okay, it's still circulating. People are still buying it. It's still a bestseller. People are buying it, reading it. They don't really understand what they're reading. This book became the spinal column of German Nazi propaganda, and it convinced millions of Westerners that a secret Jewish conspiracy actually existed, and that it was very powerful. So when people today say, "Oh, the Jews control the media, and the Jews control the banks, and the Jews control, the governments and the social movements and blah blah blah," they're supposedly in control of everything. Those tropes, those ideas come from the Nazi propaganda, come from the protocols of Zion. They have survived. These accusations survived World War II, which is amazing because, as I was saying, the protocols produced its own refutation. Why? Because given that the protocols became the central plank in German Nazi propaganda, it was through the protocols that an entire continent was convinced to collaborate with the destruction of the European Jews. Okay?
Yes.
But that widespread collaboration with the destruction of the European Jews proves that the Jews didn't control anything. All of these institutions and governments and movements and industries and blah, 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 that the Jews supposedly controlled, didn't do anything to defend the Jews. On the contrary, they either looked the other way or they actively participated, they collaborated in the effort to corral the Jews and then to kill them. So the success of the protocols as propaganda, scaring everybody about the Jews and getting them to collaborate with the destruction of the Jews, demonstrated that the Jews controlled nothing. None of the institutions that the Jews supposedly controlled according to the protocols lifted a finger to defend them. In fact, as I said, most of them cooperated. So with the Nazis. So it is just amazing that knowing about the history of World War II and the Holocaust doesn't affect the fact that people still accept the lies in the protocols. You ask people on the street, who controls the media, and most of them will say the Jews. It's incredible. Even though the same people will tell you that Israel supposedly is the guilty party in the Middle East, and that Israel is the bad guy, and that Israel is oppressing the Arab Palestinians, and that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. The same people that think that the Jews control the media will tell you these things. And the thing I always like to ask them is, well, if the Jews control the media, why do you have these strong anti-Jewish opinions in your head? Because the only contact you have with reality is through the media. You're not witnessing Israel. You're not witnessing Gaza. You're not witnessing the war in Gaza. You're not witnessing anything. You're witnessing your own apartment. And when you look out the window, you witness your street. And that's all you witness, really. A few members of your family for a little while every day, not even the whole day. That's all you witness. So you have no contact with reality that doesn't come from the media. So if you really believe the media is controlled by the Jews, you would also have to believe that the Jews are all suicidal, because the reality that the media is selling you is completely anti-Jewish. So your theory makes no sense. But people believe these theories because anti-Semitism is very deeply embedded in Western culture. Okay, so people don't stop to think whether their ideas are coherent or not. They are already anti-Semites, and they're just using confirmation bias to adopt ideas that are coherent with that prejudice. Okay, so all of that is to. So let me now return to this because that's an important context. So let me now return to this. So what people do is whenever somebody criticizes George Soros, there's a bunch of people that rise to his defense, saying, "Oh, no, you can't criticize George Soros because you're reviving the protocols of the elders of Zion. If you say that George Soros is an evil influence that is trying to destroy the West, you are reviving the protocols of Zion because George Soros is Jewish, and you're saying therefore that the Jews are trying to destroy the West." But this doesn't work. It doesn't work because whether or not George Soros is Jewish, what he is doing is objective. We can document what he's doing. And it doesn't seem like he's doing it for the Jews, because one of the things that George Soros does is attack the Jews. So a huge chunk of his money is spent promoting and funding different kinds of groups and movements that are rabidly anti-Israeli, and some of them arguably are anti-Semitic. And these groups and movements are I'll stop sharing because I'm not talking about the article right now. These groups and movements are strongly allied, at least symbolically, with jihadism, because they publicly take the position that Hamas is somehow justified, for example, or Hezbollah is somehow justified, or even Iran, because the state of Israel is allegedly oppressing Arabs in Gaza and in Judea and Samaria, right? So they take this position that becomes a kind of an apologia for jihadism. And as we've just seen, Soros is an apologist for Hamas. So there can be no question that criticizing Soros as a destroyer of the West is legitimate, whether or not he's a Jew. But the argument that we investigate in this piece is that it's possible that he's not a Jew. Okay, it's possible that George Soros is simply a traditional anti-Semite who is pretending to be a Jew. Okay, so this is the hypothesis I am investigating. Of course, I can't know for sure, and we don't have a confession from George Soros. But this is what I'm investigating. This is the question: might George Soros be an anti-Semite who only pretends to be a Jew so that his false Jewish identity can become another media weapon against the Jews? Okay, because if George Soros is very active destroying the West and he tells everybody that he's a Jew, well, then the anti-Semites can use that to say, look, the Jews are bad. George Soros is bad. He's a Jew, therefore the Jews are bad. He is destroying the West, therefore the Jews are destroying the West. You know, this kind of thing. Because the culture of anti-Semitism doesn't need very much more than that, right? So it can work that way. So maybe George Soros is claiming a Jewish identity so that he can be used in this manner. That's one hypothesis. In which case, the persons and institutions who always complain bitterly and very publicly whenever anybody attacks George Soros and claim that this is anti-Semitism, right? That attacking George Soros is anti-Semitism. Well, those people are actually protecting George Soros and therefore his attacks against Jews and against the Jewish state. So they're not really combating anti-Semitism because George Soros is promoting anti-Semitism. Okay, so this is the structure that I want people to understand. The world is being put upside down. They're being manipulated. Okay, now the reason I am investigating this hypothesis is that recently I was made aware of the very strange manner in which George Soros talks about his experience in World War II during the Nazi occupation of Hungary. Okay, now people can go read the article. It's carefully sourced, and I give all the quotes. But quickly summarized, George Soros claims that he comes from a Jewish family, a secular Jewish family, and that when the German Nazis occupied Europe, he was able to escape persecution because he claims his forgive me just one second. I have to go to the
Okay,
door.
no problem. Just to tell the audience, like, it doesn't matter if you are Jew or not. Maybe a Jew, maybe George Soros is a real Jew, but he could be anti-Semite either way. So, no, what I was telling the audience, Francisco, while you were away, is that even though he would be a real Jew, it doesn't matter. He could be anti-Semite.
Well, that's a very good point. That's a very good point.
Yeah, well,
I mean, even if it were possible to document that he is in fact a Jew, that doesn't mean we can't criticize him. And in particular, it doesn't mean that we can't criticize him for the way he attacks Israel. You know, I've been very critical of other Jews who, in my view, either don't attack Israel or who are in positions of authority in the Jewish community or in the state of Israel, and are not doing what they need to do to protect Israeli citizens. And sometimes they're doing the opposite, right? All of that is, of course, legitimate, because the only moral obligation we have is to the protection of ordinary people. And if someone is attacking ordinary people, Jews or anybody else, it doesn't matter where they come from. What matters is what they're doing.
yes.
But in this particular case, I think there's interesting evidence to suggest that he might not be a Jew. And this opens up a can of worms that allows us then to do other investigations, which we will be doing. So, but anyway, let's talk about Soros for now. So the way he talks about his experience in Nazi-occupied Hungary is that his father had an acquaintance who was a Nazi collaborator, okay? And this Nazi collaborator was a Hungarian official in the Ministry of Agriculture. And this Hungarian official was in charge of confiscating the property of Jews prior to sending these Jews to their deaths to Auschwitz. Okay. Now, to give people context, more than 400,000 Hungarian Jews were sent to Auschwitz. 90% of them were executed on arrival, immediately upon arrival. So this is not a minor thing. This is a tremendous catastrophe. And this Hungarian official that Soros talks about, he says, was in charge of confiscating the property of Jews before sending them to Auschwitz. And Soros's dad managed to get this guy to pretend that George Soros was his godson. Okay, so that George Soros was his Christian godson. So they also had fake papers, according to Soros. So this Nazi collaborator, according to this story, protected George Soros. So it's a very strange story,
Yes.
right? I mean, because why would a Nazi collaborator be interested in protecting some Jew? Especially when you're one of the very trusted Nazi collaborators who are in charge of confiscation of Jewish property. That's not a job that they're going to give to just any Nazi collaborator, right? If they had any doubts about, you know, your convictions, your anti-Semitic convictions, they're not going to give you the job of confiscating Jewish property for the Nazis, right? They're not going to give you that job. So it's amazing that the story seems incoherent. It seems incoherent. Notice if you're a Nazi collaborator with this kind of responsibility, or even with less responsibility, and you are found hiding Jews, even if you're just a German citizen and you're found hiding Jews, you're risking death.
Francisco,
You're risking death.
to clarify a thing
Go ahead.
that I didn't understand very well, is the stories that he knew that Soros was Jewish, or he was manipulated and deceived to believe that he was not Jewish, he was a Christian.
No. The story is that he knew Soros was Jewish and that he was hiding him by pretending to be his godfather.
Oh,
Okay, that's the story. Yeah, that's the story.
Oh, wow.
It's a very strange story, but it gets stranger. It gets stranger because Soros, in a 60 minutes interview, the interviewer asked him. So the interviewer talked about this situation because it's also talked about in Soros's dad's book. Tivadar Soros, Soros's dad, wrote an autobiography in which he talks about the experience of the Soros family in Nazi-occupied Hungary. And so the guy interviewing Soros, George Soros, asked him, he said, hey, so I understand that, you were saved by this Nazi collaborator who was confiscating Jewish property, and you were going around with him as he confiscated the property of Jews. And you being yourself a Jew, didn't you feel bad about this? And Soros replied that he felt no guilt. That, and in a separate interview, he said that the year of Nazi occupation of Hungary had been the happiest year of his life. And when you look closely at the way he talks about this, the impression you get, or the impression I get, at least, I won't speak for other people, but the impression I get is that it sounds like a Nazi trying to hide the fact that he's a Nazi, but not doing it very well. Like, it's like he sounds like a psychopath who's trying to simulate what a normal person would say, but he can't quite get it right. And certain phrases and ideas escape his lips that reveal what he's really thinking, right? Who he really is. So I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to show you because it's very interesting. It's very, very interesting.
Francisco, afterwards, if you have the link to the interview for George Soros, so the audience can watch it, we can upload it in the description also.
Yeah. We have, well, the links are all provided in the
article.
In the article, right? So notice what he says here. It says, this is the quote. This is the quote from George Soros. Okay, he says, "I could be on the other side, or I could be the one from whom the thing is being taken away." Now, this is an awkward sentence, but notice what he's saying. I could be on the other side, or I could be the guy who's losing his property, who's having his property confiscated. Okay, that's what he's saying. So he's saying, I could be on the side of the Nazis, or I could be on the side of the Jews. That's what he's saying. But so the implicit argument is, well, I mean, we're being persecuted. Where would you rather be? Wouldn't you rather be on the side of the Nazis than on the side of the Jews? The Jews are losing their property, and then they're sending them to death camps, right? So I'd rather be on the side of the Nazis. That's what it sounds like to me. And then he says, but there was no sense that I shouldn't be there because that was, well, actually, in a funny way, it's just like in markets, that if I weren't there, of course, I wasn't doing it, but somebody else would be taking it away anyhow. And it was whether I was there or not, I was only a spectator. The property was being taken away. So I had no role in taking away that property. So I had no sense of guilt. Wow. In other words, he is comparing this to the way he defends himself
Yes.
on the question of the British pound. So on the question of the British pound, he has a better argument, right? Because in the case of the British pound, he can say, well, look, somebody was going to make money betting against the British pound. I mean, this is not my fault. It was a structural aspect of the market. It was overvalued. The pound was overvalued. It was going to fall. So somebody's going to make money. Might as well be me. The thing is going to go down. I didn't make it go down. I just took advantage, right? That's a reasonable defense. But it doesn't work here. So he's trying to map one thing to the other. Watch. I'll put it up there again. It really doesn't work. He's saying it's just like in markets that if I weren't there, and then he forgets that he's supposed to be blameless. So that if I were, wait, I wasn't doing it. he tries to correct, but somebody else would be taking it away anyhow. What?
Wow. Yeah.
Ooh. So it's almost like he's saying, somebody's gonna fuck the Jews because it's a market. It's a Jew fucking market. That's sort of what he's saying. Somebody's gonna fuck the Jews. Might as well be us. Might as well be me. Oh wait. I wasn't doing it. He forget. I wasn't doing it. It was the other guy. It was the Hungarian guy. I was just there. I was a spectator. Wow. But look, why should I feel guilty? I mean, somebody was gonna fuck those Jews.
He may be.
Might as well be this guy. I had nothing to do with it.
He may be confusing reality with what the story he pretends to tell.
Well, he does have trouble keeping the story straight. That's another line of evidence. But that's not the problem here. The problem here is that he's a psychopath who doesn't care. This is my hypothesis. My hypothesis is that he's a psychopath who may have been collaborating with the Nazi persecution of the Jews. He's not a Jew at all, but he has this story that he has to tell. And when he's telling the story, because he is a psychopath, it is not easy for him to tell it with the phrases that would be consistent with someone who feels compassion for the victims, with someone who feels empathy for human suffering, who feels solidarity for fellow Jews. It's very difficult for him to talk that way because he doesn't feel any of those things, you see? So he has these slips of the tongue. But the other thing that you mentioned, does he remember the story correctly? Does he make mistakes? That happens too. So let me show you. It's very interesting. He says that the guy who saved him was Baumbach. The name was Baumbach. He can't remember. He apparently cannot remember the guy's first name. Okay, now let me ask you this. If you had spent, I don't know, anywhere from weeks to months with a person who is responsible for saving your life, do you think you would forget his first name?
No way.
I mean, the guy saved your life. You would never forget this guy's name, right?
Of course.
Well, neither his father, Tivadar Soros, nor George Soros appear to remember the guy's first name because they never used the guy's first name anywhere. Now, if you're making up a story, that's convenient because if you never give the guy's first name, it becomes impossible for other people to confirm or disconfirm your story because they can't even identify the person who supposedly did this, right? So, but even worse, they can't keep straight the guy's last name. So Tivadar Soros calls the guy Bauflus. And so George Soros calls him Baumbach.
Wow.
So how probable is it that somebody saves your life or the life of your son, and neither you nor your son can remember the guy's name? I think that's very hard to believe. Very hard to believe. Now, the other thing that's very strange is that the other person that was responsible, allegedly, for saving the lives of George Soros and his mother was this woman, Elsa Brandeisz. So let me put her up for people to see. So Elsa Brandeisz, put it up here. If you go to her Wikipedia page, she was given the honor by Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem is the Jewish organization, the Holocaust Remembrance Organization. And one of the things that Yad Vashem does is that it awards the title Righteous Among the Nations, right here, to non-Jews who risked their lives saving Jews in the context of the Holocaust.
Yes.
Okay? And according to the story, the official story, she saved this woman, Belanel Ajtai, who was the owner of the dance studio where Brandeisz was a teacher of dance. So what she did is she registered Lajtai's studio in her name, so that the Nazis would not think that this was a Jewish dance studio, right? And but they still grabbed Lajtai. That didn't save Lajtai. But according to the story, Bozi Soros, the mom, and George Soros were saved by this woman, Elsa Brandeisz. The other person who was allegedly saved was Balo. She's not here. Oh, is she mentioned here? No, she's not mentioned here. Okay, it doesn't matter. The other person that was allegedly saved by Brandeisz was Judith Balo, or Jutka Balo, who was the girlfriend of George Soros's older brother, Paul. Okay? So the only people that anybody claims this woman, Elsa Brandeisz, saved from the Nazis are, well, Lajtai, whom she really didn't save. I mean, she ended up being carted off by the Nazis. But then it would be Soros's mother, Soros, and this woman, Judith Ballot. But according to George Soros's own testimony, Judith Ballot died right after the siege of Budapest. So she didn't testify to Yad Vashem about Brandeisz saving her. Lajtai didn't testify to Yad Vashem either. There's no trace of Lajtai. If she existed, she almost certainly died in Auschwitz. So the only people who could have possibly testified to Yad Vashem about Elsa Brandeisz are George Soros and his mother. And normally, Yad Vashem requires multiple independent testimonies and multiple independent documentary pieces of evidence to identify a person as righteous among the nations, because this is a very specific honor given to people who did a very brave thing, and you need good documentation to confer this honor, right? But here, we don't seem to have anything other than the testimony of George Soros and his mother, right? So that is very suspicious too. That's also very suspicious. In addition, I mean, you would expect that George Soros has so much money, unlimited resources, really. that you think that if there were any way to document better that Elsa Brandeisz deserves this honor, then such documentation would have been produced already, because Soros has unlimited resources. But it doesn't seem to exist, and it becomes doubly suspicious in the context that Soros has become involved with Yad Vashem in the documentation of the Holocaust in Hungary. Okay, so Soros has his fingers on the documentation process of the Holocaust in Hungary, which would allow him to, it seems to me, gives him the opportunity to try and suppress evidence and make sure that something that could embarrass his story doesn't surface. We provide documentation on that as well in the article. Finally, it turns out that as explained, for example, in the obituaries that were written after Paul Soros died. So Paul Soros, again, is George Soros's older brother. He also became a billionaire. He was an engineer in the United States. And he also became, one of these quote unquote philanthropists, showering money on different things. And when he died some years ago, the obituaries that were written about him explained that the Soviets were sure that Paul Soros was an SS officer.
Wow.
They were so sure of this that they arrested Paul Soros and they marched him eastwards at the end of the war. According to the story, he managed to escape. But it's yet another detail suggesting that George Soros' story about being a Jew who escaped the Holocaust is full of bizarre inconsistencies and troubling details. Okay? Now, so we accept, for the sake of argument, the hypothesis that George Soros is in fact a Nazi who changed his identity. Is this a reasonable story in context? I mean, do we have evidence that Nazis did this? And the answer is yes. It has been documented that thousands of Nazis at the end of the war threw their uniforms down and joined the Nazis, walking across Europe looking for shelter, food, medicine, etc., trying to escape justice in this manner. And many of them claimed to be Jews. In fact, many of them tried to enter the liberated concentration camps at the very end of the war, or right before, rather. They tried to enter the concentration camps so that they would be liberated as Jews. Many did enter the camps, pretending to be Jews. They circumcised themselves. Okay?
Wow.
All of this is documented, and we provide the documentation we provide the link to an article, an academic article that summarizes the evidence on this. We're talking about thousands of Nazis that pretended to be either Jews or members of other communities at the end of the war in order to escape justice. Some of them ended up in Israel. Some were even recruited to the IDF. Now, these are the documented cases because some of these people were caught. But obviously, not everybody was caught. Right? Not everybody was caught. So if you've documented that thousands of Nazis did this and got caught, well, how many didn't get caught? We don't know. We don't know. So the context means that it is not impossible in principle that George Soros did this. And the details of his story and the other details that I've been finding out sort of jointly contribute to casting suspicion on his story. Now, what about the larger context of George Soros's activities? Well, there is no controversy about the fact that George Soros appears to be an enemy of Israel. I mean, there's zero controversy there. He is spending just rivers of money funding organizations that are professionally dedicated to undermining Israel, to organizing street protests in Israel, for example, in the context of the judicial reform controversy in Israel. The people on the side opposite to the government have been getting funding from the Soros, quote unquote, philanthropies. And in the United States, it has been documented that the people who participated in the BLM riots and the people who organized the campus protests and riots supporting Hamas against Israel in this latest war, those people were also getting paid by the Soros philanthropies, and we provide links to that in the article, right? So you have this general picture of a man who spends his billions undermining the Jewish state, which would be consistent, right, with a secret Nazi. A secret Nazi would be doing that, right? Would be trying to destroy the Jewish state. It would make perfect sense. So that part is consistent. Now, the other part that it becomes kind of a clincher for me, at least. I mean, of course, readers can reach their own conclusions, but for me, this becomes a clincher. Is that let me get back to the article. So in the last part of the article, let me scroll down really quick. Over here, yeah, we got it. It's over here. So it turns out that the way Soros spends his money is, you could almost call it a partnership with USAID. And the partnership with USAID is a partnership with the CIA, because USAID has been acting as a front for the CIA. Now, this is something that has been said out loud for a long time. So here I have a quote from Foreign Affairs, writing in 2014. Forget, that might be a mistake. This might be foreign policy. Let me see. Yeah, it's foreign policy. Let me correct that. This is me. My brain doing a word slip there. So let me correct that before I forget. So foreign affairs, no, this was foreign policy. There we go. I don't know why I thought that right now, but I looked at foreign affairs and I thought, no, I don't think that's right. Not the same publication. Anyway, let's find it. Foreign policy. Here we go. In 2014, Foreign Policy wrote, foreign governments have long accused the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, of being a front for the CIA or other groups dedicated to their collapse. In other words, to the collapse of those foreign governments. Is that accusation reasonable? Well, check out what Foreign Policy says in the same article. And this is something that nobody denies. This is public knowledge. They say, quote, throughout the 1960s and 1970s, the agency, USAID, often partnered with the CIA's now shuttered Office of Public Safety, a department beset by allegations that it trained foreign police in terror and torture techniques and encouraged official brutality, according to a 1976 Government Accountability Office report. And USAID had a public safety program which worked with the CIA to train foreign police forces. By the time the program was officially closed, USAID had helped train thousands of military personnel and police officers in Vietnam, the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, and other countries, now notorious for their treatment of political dissidents. End of quote. Okay? So USAID is a front for the CIA. This accusation has resurfaced now in the context of Trump's simulacrum of doing a house cleaning of USAID. It's nothing new. It's nothing new. Now, the question is, when this public safety, Office of Public Safety was closed, officially closed, it belonged to the CIA, but USAID was acting as a front. When they closed that, does this mean that USAID stopped behaving as a front for the CIA? No, it doesn't. They kept doing it. So one example is during the 1980s, USAID spent millions to indoctrinate an entire generation of Afghan children into jihadi terrorism. This is the summary from the Washington Post. In the twilight of the Cold War, the United States, via USAID, spent millions of dollars to supply Afghan school children with textbooks filled with violent images and militant Islamic teachings, part of covert attempts to spur resistance to the Soviet occupation, right? So that's the apology. The apology is, oh, we were fighting the communists, therefore it was okay to destroy an entire generation of Afghan children with violent jihadism, right? That's how they apologize for it. And then another example right here, USAID created for the CIA a Cuban social network that allowed the Cuban Communist government to gather intelligence on Cuban dissidents. Now, of course, the apology is that this was a mistake. They called it, quote, an eye-opening display of incompetence, end of quote. But they have to call it that because the alternative is that they're helping the Cuban government stay in power, right? So they have to say that this was a mistake, that they didn't mean to do that. But this is what they always say, right? Every time something horrible is done by the CIA, they claim that, oh, we were trying to do a good thing, but we screwed up. So notice what Mike Gonzalez over at the Heritage Foundations wrote a few years ago. This is during Trump 1.0. He says, quote, there is credible evidence that the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, was used to promote abroad policies that remain controversial within American society. To achieve these ends, USAID has teamed up in some countries with groups funded by financier George Soros. Evidence is emerging that during the past 8 years, Soros, his Open Societies foundations, and their many smaller affiliates have received U.S. taxpayer money through USAID, and that USAID has made the OSF the main implementer of its aid. The main implementer of its aid. So there's obviously a very deep partnership going on between USAID and Soros. Given that USAID acts as a front for the CIA, this is a partnership between the CIA and Soros, okay? Now, does that make sense? I think it does, but let me point out something else that happens with the partnership before I explain why this makes sense. This here is a quote from The Guardian, which explains that one of the things the CIA uses USAID for is to push in different countries for the creation of social movements and street protests and so forth to destabilize and remove governments that the CIA doesn't like. Okay? So in countries that are trying to be democratic, what they do with these interventions, the foreign election becomes, quote, an American creation, a sophisticated and brilliantly conceived exercise in Western branding and mass marketing that in 4 countries in 4 years has been used to try to salvage rigged elections and topple unsavory regimes. That's the apology, right? They tell you, we're doing it against bad guys. That's why it's supposed to be okay, you see? But what they're doing is they're intervening foreign elections, thus engineering democracy through the ballot box and civil disobedience. The Democratic Party's National Democratic Institute, the Republican Party's International Republican Institute, the U.S. State Department, and USAID are the main agencies involved in these grassroots campaigns, as well as the Freedom House NGO and billionaire George Soros' Open Society Institute. End of quote. Okay. Now, I want to draw your attention to the fact in the recent simulacrum of a house cleaning in USAID, what the Trump administration and its people have been saying is that they have been criticizing what the Democratic administrations were doing through USAID. But notice, it's perfectly bipartisan. These CIA operations using USAID as a front have the support of the National Democratic Institute, which is a Democratic Party organization, and the Republican Party's International Republican Institute, which is the counterpart in the Republican Party. They're almost identical in their aims. So it's a uniparty. There's no difference here. We've been saying that for a long time. Now, this kind of thing, using USAID as a front for the CIA to engineer street protests and destabilize foreign governments, they've been doing that in Israel too. And so this image that I'm showing you here, that comes from a document that was submitted to the US Congress. It's a congressional investigation that found that all kinds of monies were flowing from USAID and the State Department and the Department of Defense to the Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, which act as a funnel, then directing all that money to groups like PEF Israel and Blue White Future, which then organize street protests and mobilizations in Israel, which are highly injurious to the security strategy of the State of Israel, right? Now, does all of this make sense? It makes perfect sense. Why? Well, because the Rockefeller, and I want to point this out too before I go there. George Soros has worked hard to promote other anti-Israel attacks. His Open Society Foundations and also the Ford Foundation heavily fund the Tides Foundation. So it's a kind of philanthropy, money laundering, right? So they push the money into another foundation, right? And then that foundation is the one that distributes the money, and then it becomes harder to see what's going on. The Tides Foundation then channels the money to all sorts of pro-Palestinian, quote unquote, groups that agitate within the United States, undermining the prestige of Israel and the support for Israel inside the United States. Now, does all of this make sense? Well, it does, because working with the Rockefeller and Ford networks is precisely what a Nazi would do. The Rockefeller and Ford networks were heavily involved with the support and financing for the eugenics movement, as we've explained many times here. And the eugenics movement is what became German Nazism. The Rockefellers were very heavily involved in the creation of the CIA. And the CIA was created by absorbing at least tens of thousands of German Nazi war criminals and Nazi collaborators. We have articles explaining all of this, giving you all of the documentation that you need.
Wow.
Here they are. People can go check them out if they want to test our claims, and I encourage them to do so. As always, the invitation is you should try to refute us. It's the only way to learn anything and to have any contact with reality is when you try to refute the things that seem controversial. So you should try to refute this. You should never believe anything that you read on management of reality. And the same goes, of course, for any other source. Okay. So my conclusion is, well, look, it really does seem like this guy has a Nazi ideology. His story about his experience in Nazi-occupied Hungary suggests that he may be a covert Nazi, and he is working with literal Nazis because he is working with the CIA, and the CIA was created by absorbing tens of thousands of Nazis. So obviously you would expect the CIA to be promoting an anti-Israeli foreign policy, which is of course what they are doing, and they're doing it in part by partnering with Soros. So my parting comment would be when you see institutions or persons loudly complaining that criticisms of George Soros are supposedly anti-Semitic, you should understand that those institutions and persons are probably agents of the empire, because the defense they're making of George Soros is incoherent, and the effect of that defense is to protect someone who is attacking the Jewish people and the Jewish state. So it's a kind of Orwellian inversion. It's an Orwellian it's putting the world upside down. So they tell you war is peace, freedom is slavery, and opposition to Nazism is anti-Semitism. No, anti-Semitism is the promotion of Nazism, and that's what Soros is doing. Attacking Soros is not anti-Semitism; it's pro-Semitism. That's what it is. So that would be my final conclusion, and I think we need to be careful to investigate other cases because I don't think Soros is the only one whose war story escaped attention, and I don't think he's the only person who managed to become influential as a fake Jew. I think there are other people doing this. And if we are to effectively defend the Jewish people and the Jewish state, we have to take this phenomenon seriously. I return to the point you made, just because someone is a Jew, even if they're a real Jew, doesn't mean they can't be taking an anti-Israel or even an anti-Semitic position. And we shouldn't pretend that anybody who takes those positions is not a real Jew. I'm not saying that. But it's also possible that some of these people are not real Jews. And in the case of Soros, it appears a case of a fabricated identity by people who are ideologically committed to the destruction of the Jewish people. And that sort of thing needs to be taken very seriously.
Okay, so Francisco, now I think the audience have the big picture to read the article and to have their own conclusions. We have also another topic if we want to deep into that, to dive into that.
I think we should leave that one for
the next one.
For next week, yeah, because there will be more material next week. I'm expecting a lot of stuff to happen this week on the Iran front. So I think we will have much more to talk about, and we can give more context if we leave that for next week, because we've really run out of time here. And this was a juicy enough topic that it deserved an hour, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, everyone. Like, subscribe, share with your family members, friends. Let's make this message as widely as possible.
Thank you very much, everybody in the audience, and we'll see you next Monday.
Thank you.